Okay, thank you for being here and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure. So my name is José Pinto and this will be a brief presentation about underwater robotics and things that robots are capable of doing right now and what they will be capable of doing next. So a bit about me. I'm also a diver, but I just started diving in 2018, so I'm a rookie in the field, but I'm anxious to dive with you. My background is computer science from Porto University, and I love everything about science, robots, and the ocean. So I joined the Underwater Systems and Technology Lab from Porto University in 2004, and over there I've been doing a lot of research using sea robots, surface and underwater cables and cabled, etc. My specialization is coordination of multiple robots at sea. I've been lucky to work in a lot of projects with very bright people, and these will be the results not only from my work, but mostly the work done by large groups. So I recently actually joined the spin-off from the laboratory. We are continuing to do the work from there, and I will talk also about what we do there and the main products that are being used. So this is the outline of presentation. Why do I think underwater robotics are relevant also for exploration? The difference between ROVs and AUVs, and we've seen in the presentations a lot of examples of ROVs and AUVs, and also so the laboratory at Porto University and the spin-off from Porto University, and real-world applications and results. And just a slide about what can be next. So why I think underwater robotics are very useful for exploring the ocean. As we saw in the presentation on the deep sea, most of the ocean is actually dark, cold, sometimes dirty. So there are coral reefs and there are very nice places where divers, recreational divers probably want to go, but a lot of the space there, it's dangerous, dirty, and dull. And for that, robots are a very good fit. So, of course, a robot cannot substitute a human diver. There's a lot of insight and expertise that comes from the human diver. However, there are a lot of tests where robots can actually be better than humans. For instance, they are very good at localizing themselves while underwater. They are very good at communicating with other robots or to the surface while underwater. And these kind of tasks are perfect. So they can take very long missions under the ocean. They can go to dangerous places and put themselves at risk. And they can also go to dirty places without having humans there. So, however, having robots underwater poses many challenges. Some challenges, it's the same as diving with humans. So they have to know where they are while under the water. There's no GPS, so the radio waves are very difficult to propagate. And deep down, there's also no light, so they have to carry their own illumination. So they have to somehow know where they are and use other types of sensors for that. Also, they control underwater. It's much more difficult than other robots, for instance, at the surface. For instance, if a robot stops at the surface, it knows, so it can stop and think what to do next. A robot underwater, if it stops the motor, keeps drifting, and it will lose track of where it is and what it is doing. So it needs not only to know where it is, but also its environment. What are the currents that is dragging the robot away from its place? Also, communications with the surface, it's difficult. Sometimes we can use a cable, but the cable also poses problems, can get tangled in other obstacles and debris underwater. And otherwise, we can use acoustic communications, but they have very low bandwidth. Optical communications, like we saw in a previous presentation, are also a possibility, but the range is also quite small because light gets absorbed by the water. So in terms of remotely operated vehicles, and I just have one slide about ROVs. ROVs, probably a lot of you already seen ROVs. These are robots that are tethered to the surface, so there's an umbilical cable. And basically, there is a video stream. There is also, sometimes you have lots of cameras. Sometimes you also have grippers, scissors, a lot of tools that the ROV can carry. It has some limitations. So, for instance, something needs to be at the surface connected to the ROV. That can be a ship or it can also be the shore. And because of that, the range that the ROV can go is limited, and also the conditions, so the surface conditions can also either a big ship is required with a lot of personnel on board, or the sea conditions need to be very good for being able to do these operations. For navigation, sometimes these ROVs use sound, so a GPS, but using acoustics. And in this case, there's a set of transducers on the ship or on the shore that basically relay the position information to the ROV, and with that, the ROV can localize itself quite precisely. Another kind of vehicle is the autonomous underwater vehicles. So in this case, there is no tether to the surface, which brings an additional problem. So there's no human seeing what the vehicle is doing while under the surface. So in that case, the vehicle needs to do all those things that I mentioned before by themselves. So it needs to plan what to do next, also estimate where it is, and control its movement. So not only plan where to go, but how to go there, avoiding every obstacle and keeping track of currents, etc. The main advantage in relation to ROVs is that it can survey large areas at a time, and without having humans always attending what the vehicle is doing. So this is a photo from the lab, so the lab at Porto University. On the back you see people, and we have people from many different backgrounds, from computer science, from electrical engineering, mechanicals, also physics, mathematics, etc., also oceanography, etc. And on the front you see a lot of robots that have been built at the lab. So you see, for instance, ROVs on the top right, an ROV that was built there. You see also planes. We also use drones in collaboration with vehicles on the surface and underwater. And the most important are these cylinders, the torpedo-shaped robots, which are the AUVs. On the left, you see water column AUVs, the AUVs that measure properties of the water. And on the right, you see the bottom mapping AUVs that basically take measurements from the bottom. This is very briefly the history of the lab. In '97, we acquired an AUV from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. This was actually the first REMUS that was ever sold, if someone knows about the AUV. This was way before there was a company ever selling REMUS. Then in 2000, we started building our own, or at least starting designing our own AUV. And in 2006, we actually won an innovation prize for a low-cost AUV. That was how it looked like in 2006. And in 2008, there was a spin-off called OceanScan that basically started with the intent of commercializing this AUV and exporting the AUV. Also in 2008, there was a collaboration that started with Portuguese Navy. Maybe you saw in the first presentation of the panel, there was an LAUV in one of the slides, because the Portuguese Navy is also using these AUVs at the field. And in 2010, we started having a big exercise with the Portuguese Navy, which is organized both by the Portuguese Navy and the Porto University. And there, people from all over the world bring AUVs and test the capabilities of these vehicles. So these are just more pictures of robots that were being developed there, but there's no time for everything, so I'll just go and focus more on the AUV and on the LAUV. This is an exploded view of the vehicle. In the brighter white, you see the things, so the sensors that we are using for estimating the position of the vehicle. So when the vehicle is at the surface, it's quite easy. It can use GPS because it is in visibility of the satellites. But when it goes under the water, it can use a sensor, an acoustic sensor called DVL, that actually sends sound to the bottom, and by hearing the Doppler shift in the sound, can measure its speed in relation to the bottom, which is quite useful, just like a laser mouse measures its movement in relation to the table. Another thing that can be used is the same that is used on the ROVs, so LBL. So beacons at the surface that send the position information to the AV. But if we use the other sensors, we can actually not require a ship. We can be anywhere, and the vehicle can be unattended and basically be in the open sea by itself with a very good accuracy of its position. Also in the front, we have an obstacle avoidance sensor. So if the vehicle is going towards some rock or some wall, it will deviate from the obstacle by itself. That is for estimation. For communications, it's the things in orange. So at the surface, again, it's quite easy. We can use Wi-Fi to communicate with computers on the surface, or we can even use GSM and satellite comms if we are in the open sea. When we are under the water, typically we use an acoustic modem that has ranges like 3 or 4 kilometers and requires, again, that and is in the vicinity, so nearby, to receive these communications. Nonetheless, most of the times there's no communications with AUV. When they are underwater, they are by themselves. So some real-world applications for water column, so AUVs that measure the water. Something we did in collaboration with the CBU and also Universidade of Azores was fish tracking, both sunfish and whale tracking. In 2014, we created these satellite markers that were tagged in sunfish. And whenever the sunfish would pop up, we would know its position with its location with precision. And as soon as we know the position of a sunfish, that basically tells us that there is something of interest in the area, because if sunfish, a lot of sunfishes are popping up in some location, there should be something interesting. So instead of capturing the sunfish and studying its behavior, we can also study the behavior of the sunfish in its natural environment after its life. So in this case, we wanted to localize the fish and then basically study the environment of the fish. For this, we use the spotters, and also we use drones as spotters. So we were flying drones in the area where, in this case, whales usually come up. And whenever a whale was spotted from the drone, it would be marked on a map, and it would start a new survey with multiple vehicles. So this is the type of data that we were collecting. On the left is actually the software that is used to receive the data from the vehicles and control them in real time. You were seeing a vehicle going very fast, which was an airplane, the drone. The AUVs, we just receive some positions from time to time using an acoustic modem, but for every other time, we use a simulator to estimate what vehicles are doing underwater. The data that we collected is on the right. There's a video there, but I don't think it's showing. So on the top right, there's a video from an action camera that was mounted on the AV. And actually, this action camera, we thought that maybe we could spot some sunfish on the camera, but it was much more useful because it was actually also detecting particles in the water column. And these particles were salps, so living beings, which are part of the chain food and also what the sunfish were actually eating, and that's why they were popping up at those locations. On the bottom right, we see a sample of data that was collected around the whales, and in this case was a microscopic camera that is capable of focusing on microparticles in the water. Another water column application is study of fronts. So fronts is the boundary where two bodies of water mix. In one application, we use this for river fronts. So when the fresh water meets the sea, on the left you see actually a thermal camera, and you see quite clearly two shapes. On the left, it's water from the river, and on the right is water from the sea, which is colder. And there is also a place in between where the water is even hotter, which is the mixing. Usually the mixing part is the most interesting because a lot of biological processes appear only on this mixing. So we devised an algorithm for the AV to, as soon as it gets placed in the water, it will detect the front and then start crisscrossing and go around the front in 3D and try to get the structure and get more data about the front. This is data that we collected. So this was the only thing that the operator did was placing the AUV in the water and then looking at the phone to check if everything was all right with the AUV, because whenever it was popping up, it was sending an SMS saying, I'm okay, and continuing to do the mission. 7 hours later, there was this track of the AV encircling the complete front, and below there is a section, so a vertical section of the collected data. And you see, for instance, in blue is the fresh water, in red is the saline water, and there is some strange things like, for instance, this vertical profile where there is fresh water going deeper than usual. And this is actually the formation of an internal wave, and this is also explained in this paper, and it was detected using this data. Another application for tracking of fronts was in the middle of Pacific, using actually the same ship that was on the last presentation from the deep sea panel, the Falker from Smith Ocean Institute. In this case, we were using ASVs to detect an ocean front from the Arctic to the subtropical waters. And then after arriving at this place, we just sent a lot of AUVs to the water to try to get as much data as possible. And we were able to collect data from a jetty coming out of the front, which is like a finger, and it's a known but rare phenomena. In the middle of Pacific, there were currents of 1 meter per second, which is really rare, and it's because of this formation. That square, or that volume, it's 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers by 100 meters depth. So each line is a vertical profile of 100 meters. So maybe more interesting to you, because on the bottom it's where more interesting things happen. For bottom mapping, we also use multiple AUVs at the same time. Is it possible to click on the right panel? Maybe. Okay. So this is the software that we use, for instance, to control multiple vehicles at the same time. So the AVs, again, are sent to the water. As soon as they detect that they are in the water, they start controlling themselves. So they start being autonomous. And an operator can basically draw a polygon that needs to be surveyed. And according to the vehicles that are ready for operations, vehicles in the water, and their sensors, they start getting tasks allocated to them. Tasks are basically map sub-area of that big area. After the vehicles do this mapping, they come to the surface and they communicate the data that was collected. Typically is, so data from the bottom typically is side-scan sonar, and we saw also a lot of samples of side-scan sonar. So maybe I can wait a bit for that. So again, it's quite difficult for an operator to keep track of 3 AUVs at the same time, because it's like 3 divers in the water. But with simulation running on the shore, at least we know the estimated position of all the vehicles. So we saw some side scan data. What we do with side scan data is we mark contacts, so points of interest in that side scan data, and with that we generate new tasks like taking a picture at that location or going there with a magnetometer, etc. Again, as soon as these tests are added, the vehicles that have those sensors will be retasked to go to these locations. This is actually the place where we take most of our tests in LAUV, and this is also the location of OceanScan, so the company. So more samples of side scan. On the top left, in the harbor, there was a container after a storm that was actually fell down to the water, and the cargo ships needed to stop for a while. So they tried to use a ship to detect the container and couldn't do it. And they asked the university, because we were going there a lot of times, can you go there and try to find? And very quickly we were able to find the container, and we almost ran over the container. It was very murky, the water. On the top right, you see data from a natural park, and you will see sand and rocks. It's a very hard environment, both for people and for the AVs. And on the bottom, you see also data. So this was one of the first archaeology missions that we did with the AVs, in this case in a submarine, a U-boat submarine that also happens to be close by Porto. So in the REP exercise that we have every year in the Navy, a lot of times we take part of mine countermeasure exercises. In this case, there was an exercise where the Navy divers basically sunk some objects that we needed to detect. We didn't know much about the objects, but so we would have to survey, and then the objects of interest, we would have to take more information of that. So this is an example of side scan data, and there are some objects that appear to be above the bottom, so we mark these contacts. Also, you see a square before the survey, and that square is a calibration maneuver for a magnetometer that was also being carried. So also on the same survey, actually, we were lucky enough that we could take still images of some of the objects, but not center because we didn't know their locations. But after we had this data, then we could go exactly at those locations. So after we did this first survey, I think 5 meters from the bottom, then we could basically go really close to the objects at 2 meters from the bottom and autonomously also take the pictures from the objects. Another type of data that we get from the bottom is multi-beam data. In this case, this sensor, instead of getting just the reflection from the underwater, we can also get geometry of the bottom. So that line you see on the top left, and by having a lot of lines with distance to the bottom, we can create a map like that, or also a 3D object like you see in the bottom. So this is an expedition we did with archaeologists, some of them in the audience, and it was a fun one. So in this case, the objective was to go to the coast of Sharjah, an emirate, and try to detect as many wrecks as possible to dive there. The idea was to find ancient wrecks from Portuguese from 1500s, I think, something like that. So the idea in this case was to deploy 1 or 2 AVs at a time, and then just go along the coast. Every time we found a wreck, we would mark and try to dive on the uncharted wrecks. This is an example of a side scan image on the left. In this case, we saw that there was something like a frame, a strange object. Also on the magnetometer of the same data, you see a blob, and this blob, it's a magnetic anomaly that would correspond to also some magnetic object being on the bottom. And this is the same that you see here on the bottom right, basically the frame from a contemporary wreck. One of the recent projects was mapping a natural park. So we saw on the deep sea panel again that there is most of the sea is uncharted. The coastal waters are also uncharted, and even natural parks are uncharted. So the idea for this project was to get the best resolution possible for a newly created natural park in the north of Portugal. This natural park has the particularity of being very windy, so it's a good spot for kite surfers and windsurfers, and it's very difficult to dive, and also difficult for ships and AUVs. So still, we had 20 days of operations on the area. We did 1,500 kilometers with the AUVs. We were using at least 2 AUVs at a time. Sometimes we used up to 4 AUVs at a time. And initially, we used actually camera, sorry. We used camera to basically get insights from a biologist to detect the type of bottom that was there. And after we classified some different habitats, we use these classifications and translate that to the side scan sonar images, and basically we're capable of creating an entire map for 75 kilometers squared of where there's kelp, where there's rocks, sand, etc. So different marine habitats. This is the result, so that's 5 kilometers by 15 kilometers, which gives 75 kilometers. And again, it was fun, but it was a very harsh environment to work in. So what I think it's next, right now, we still need the ships to go and deploy the AUVs. We still need the ships to go and collect the AUVs. There are projects that are starting to use just drone ships and underwater drones to map the entirety of the sea. This is the Ocean Infinity Armada that, with the objective of mapping the entire deep sea. However, the coast is always changing, and these vehicles cannot go to the coast. So I think what's next for us is to develop something like that, but smaller, affordable, and easier to use on the coast. And that's it. Thank you.